Good afternoon, and welcome to this edition of the FRI Hot Topic Hotline Series. I am Dr. Michael Sykuta, Executive Director of FRI. FRI was established in 1988 at the University of Missouri to provide a neutral environment for stakeholders in regulated public utility industries to come together to examine, understand, and debate current issues related to public utility policy. In addition to our Hot Topic Hotline webinars, we host an annual Public Utility Symposium this year on September 21st, as well as executive and advanced training programs related to regulated utility industries. You can learn more about FRI and our programs at fri.missouri.edu. Our topic today is decarbonizing the natural gas system. And we have a loaded program, so I'm going to try and get through these introductory comments quickly and get us to our speakers. Amid the continuing pressure to achieve environmental policy objectives for reduced greenhouse gas emissions, the natural gas system sits in a pivotal position. Transition from coal to gas-fired electricity generation has allowed substantial reductions in carbon emissions to date. However, federal, state, and municipal net zero and clean energy goals require more significant transformation for the natural gas system itself. Some of these policy goals include not just reducing carbon emissions from natural gas systems, but the elimination of fossil fuel use entirely. Today's panelists represent a variety of interests, experience, and perspectives related to this challenge. We have with us today Paul Kjellander, President of KJELL LLC, and Commissioner Emeritus for the Idaho Public Utility Commission. Paul served as President of NARUC in the 2020 to 2021 year, and is a former member of our FRI Advisory Board. Chris Garbaz is the Director of Economics and Planning at Mississippi Public Utility Staff. In his role, Chris has experience working in the Mississippi Power Company's Kemper facility. Chris Peterson, Senior Associate at Hush Blackwell, has been working on project development for RNG projects around the United States. Mark LaBelle is a Senior Associate at the Regulatory Assistance Project and co-author of RAP's 2021 report, Under Pressure, Gas Utility Regulation for a Time of Transition. And Dan Lapato is Managing Director of State Affairs for the American Gas Association. Dan is also a member of our FRI Advisory Board. I've asked each panelist to take just a few minutes to share more about their backgrounds and experiences related to today's topic. I'll then ask the panel to respond to three key questions. What technologies exist or are in the works that could help decarbonize the natural gas system? What impediments exist for the adoption and implementation of those technologies at an effective scale, whether technological, economic, or policy related? And what regulatory goals may be needed, or what issues do regulators need to be particularly concerned about as we continue to push for a carbon-free or even fossil fuel-free natural gas system? We will have time at the end for questions from the audience. I invite you to submit questions using the Q&A feature as they arise. So on the bottom of your window there, you should see the Q&A button. Go ahead and click on that and type any questions into the Q&A box. You'll also be able to upvote questions. So if someone else asks the question that you think is really interesting and would like to hear, vote for that question. And then as we get to the Q&A time, we'll try and prioritize those questions that have the most expressed interest. So with that, let's get started and with our opening comments, and I'll turn it over to Paul Kjellander.
First of all, thank you, Michael, for bringing together the panel on decarbonizing the natural gas system. The comments that I'm going to at least open up with are going to deal primarily with pipeline quality natural gas and some of the experience that I had with that and exposure during the mid-2000s when a natural gas distribution company in Idaho called Intermountain Gas, which is now a part of NDU Energy, was working with a developer at a dairy to create, I think, one of the very first RNG projects that was going to convert dairy waste, animal waste, into pipeline quality natural gas. Now, at that time, that project was seen as just too risky, for lack of a better phrase, for the natural gas distribution company to go it alone and pursue it. So what quickly, though, emerged was the fact that Idaho was rapidly becoming a major player in the dairy industry, and that prompted the utility to take an independently developed project that was coming on board very, very seriously. So to set the tone of what was going on during that time frame, natural gas prices were going through a very volatile upward swing. The dairy industry in Idaho was now the third largest in the nation and growing, and the ag sector was looking for ways to try and capitalize on what looked like a long-term trend on high natural gas prices. And renewable natural gas in the form of methane dairy waste seemed to be a prime target, at least for this part of the country. Also at that time, there were no subsidies, there were no RNG mandates or other significant offsets that factored into the decision for the developers to move forward at that time. They simply saw the high natural gas prices, and based on their assumptions that those prices were going to remain high, they penciled it out and they moved forward with their business plan. Now, while that venture was at the time perceived as too risky for the natural gas utility, since it was a first of its kind RNG project, the utility distribution company worked really closely with the developers to help get this project online to deliver pipeline quality natural gas. And they were in fact successful. And when it came online, there was a lot of hope and excitement about developing other projects. But within a very short window of time, shale gas hit the market. And almost overnight, the RNG project was no longer competitive as natural gas prices fell back into the $2 range from some highs at that time that were upwards of almost $20 an MMBTU. So within the months that followed, all the equipment from that initial project was sold to scrap, and one of the very first pipeline quality natural gas projects was officially dead. So now let's fast forward 15 years to where we are today. Things are clearly different. And from a state regulatory perspective, the landscape has changed, and in some circumstances, so have the risk factors. Today, I think we're seeing a growing need to address decarbonization of energy resources, and that puts a target on natural gas. As a result, there are a variety of state mandates, incentives, and subsidy programs that are renewing interest in developing pipeline quality natural gas. And because some of these state mandates and incentive programs directly impact distribution companies, the risk of utility-driven RNG projects in these states is diminishing. I had a chance to talk recently with Scott Madison from MDU Resources in a recent Public Utilities fortnightly article, blatant plug, about how they're dealing with RNG in their service territory, which serves over 1 million customers in about 8 states. And when I say 8 states, I bring that up because no 2 states are the same, and no 2 state public policies are the same. So as this company tries to deal with RNG, they have 8 different jurisdictions they need to be looking at as they move forward. And from Mr. Madison's experience, it's clear that a one-size-fits-all approach just isn't going to work as they try to deal with decarbonization. Some of those states have directives and incentives, while others have not taken any kind of public policy position on decarbonization. So not only are the resources that are being developed in states very different, but so are the end uses of those RNG projects. The raw material includes wastewater treatment, landfill, and animal waste in end-use territory. It's predominantly dairy waste. And the end use includes direct customer use, often through some voluntary purchase programs for customers that result in a slightly higher cost, but again, it's voluntary. And in states without direct subsidies or mandates, they're seeing production of RNG that's being delivered through the pipeline system to take advantage of subsidies that exist in the transportation sector. Many of you are aware of the RINs program, the Renewable Identification Numbers, that are very similar to RECs in the electricity sector. Those RINs seem to be quite a financial motivator to move forward with some RNG projects, again, directly tied to the transportation sector. One of the takeaways for me from the conversation with MDU Scott Madison was that state subsidies and incentives are pushing a lot of development, but these programs can go away and be eliminated almost overnight, putting existing projects at risk. But given the current status of price per MMBTU, many of these projects are in the money even without the subsidy. However, as I've mentioned earlier, we've seen market price volatility take its toll on RNG projects, and that's been in the not so distant past. But I think the biggest takeaway for me is that the barriers that may have resulted in too much risk for natural gas distribution companies to develop their own RNG resources is greatly diminishing. The technology has improved, and if we see this trend continue, and it's actually the case that the risk is diminishing, I think we're likely going to be seeing a lot more utility-driven RNG development that could result in a greater percentage of those resources in the overall fuel mix. So those are my opening thoughts I wanted to share with you. And again, Michael, thanks for you and FRI for letting me be a part of today's discussion.
Thank you very much, Paul. Next on the list is Chris Garbaz from the Mississippi Public Utility staff. Chris?
All right, ready to roll here. Okay, so just a couple of background points. I'm an economist, previously a professor for about 25 years, and written a number of articles on energy and regulation. And I've been with the Mississippi Public Utility staff for since the mid 1990s. I want to make a point that I'm not an engineering expert, and I'm focused more on what I guess we would say costs and prices and effectiveness, cost effectiveness, and so forth. So in regard to the Kemper project, that was a really quite a brilliant project. And a terrific idea, maybe way ahead of its time, perhaps. But the idea, of course, an IGCC, integrated gasification combined cycle. The plant was dropped on top of a coal mine, essentially lignite. Mississippi has enormous quantities of lignite, and so it made a lot of sense. And not just that, but around the world, lignite is in many places. In Germany, heavily, and in China and a number of other places. In fact, the company brought in people from all over the world to look at this plant as a possibility for them to create a similar plant in their countries. However, the plant did not exactly come to fruition, and there were numerous delays. And the main problem was first of a kind, and any kind of very large, this is a very large project also, any kind of first of a kind engineering project probably needs to be scaled up. In this particular case, the scale up was approximately 150 times the experimental plant that was the basis for Kemper. So it was, what should I say, beyond the ability of the company to execute such a large project. And as Mike Mudd has said in some of his comments, if you look at Coal and Carbon Management Guidebook by BCS for NARUC, we had a few weeks ago a webinar in which he narrated that particular guidebook, and one of the things that he emphasized was you need to scale things up on a much smaller scale, and you need to run through several plants probably before you are able to be able to get to the point where it's going to be cost effective, efficient, and reliable. So what happened in this particular case was that the company had numerous delays, and those delays were primarily the result of the first of a kind engineering and having to do and redo things, and there were cost overruns. In fact, in the end, the cost overrun was on the order of perhaps around $6 million. That was, I must say, both company and regulatory authority made a good decision in discontinuing the carbon capture part of the plant and the syngas. Essentially, what you get with an IGCC in the case, in the Kemper case, was the lignite was transformed to a gas, a kind of a syngas, and from the gas there was carbon capture, and then sequestration was to be through EOG, through injecting into oil wells that no longer had the pressure to bring the oil up, and so it was a complete project in figuring out how and trying to figure out how to capture the carbon and store it, and in fact make some money off of the carbon that could be sold. And there were contracts in which the carbon was to be sold. But in the end, the decision was no, we're not going to go to this. And so the plant now operates as simply a gas-fired plant. Maybe at some point in the future, it'll be reconstituted, or someone else will take the information from the plant, what's been learned there, and perhaps be able to extend the idea, and maybe, as Mike Budd has suggested, several iterations to get to the point where you can figure out exactly how to efficiently build such a plant. So with that, I want to mention one more thing. In Mississippi, there is a new project on hydrogen. It's to be 10 times larger than any other hydrogen project in the United States. And it's to be based on renewables, that is wind and solar, I think primarily probably solar, through hydrolysis to extract carbon, to extract hydrogen, and then store it in salt domes as necessary, so that it would be available in the future. So essentially a way to to create the reliability of renewables by being able to use the hydrogen at any time. And one other little bit I would throw out here. In 2019, there were 39 billion metric tons of CO2 emitted worldwide, captured 0.0036 metric tons. So that may give pause to how we're going to deal with that much carbon going into the atmosphere. So at that point, I'll pass it on.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Chris Peterson. I'm an attorney with Hush Blackwell Law Firm. We're a Missouri-based law firm with offices throughout the Midwest and coast to coast as well. I represent a variety of different parties in renewable natural gas projects, but really spend most of my time working with RNG developers on everything from farmer and feedstock supply agreements, leases, easements, offtakes, interconnection agreements, and advise and work with these developers regarding government incentives for RNG production, including as Paul discussed, some of these federal and state incentives, including federal RINs. And right now, the three primary states with state incentives for this RNG production include California's low carbon fuel standard, Oregon's clean fuels program, and Washington's recently enacted clean fuel standard. So, for those of you that don't have kind of the background in how these RNG projects work, they utilize an anaerobic digestion technology that essentially collects the gas that results from decomposing organic matter. They collect that and then are able to further refine out various other gases. So kind of the primary gas is methane that is resulting from this process. But after further refining that and conditioning that gas, through various equipment and they call them scrubbing equipment to try and scrub out some of these other trace gases, they're left with what is in essence a renewable natural gas that's able to be injected directly into the pipeline, along with our conventional natural gas system. And again, in order to qualify for these state incentives for the federal RINs, it's to be used in the transportation market. And so I work with RNG that's created using as a feedstock or as a supply source, cattle manure, organic waste from food processing companies, dairy cow manure, chicken and turkey litter, swine manure, landfills, and wastewater treatment plants. So as you can see, kind of a variety of different sources for this feedstock to generate this RNG. And each one of these sources will, have, their incentives will be different depending on, what source of feedstock it is and what the carbon intensity score is of, generating renewable natural gas from those feedstocks. I also assist these developers as they go through the financing process of kind of preparing a project, obtaining the equipment necessary to do so, securing agreements with the right parties in order to really process this RNG and to be able to sell it into the transportation market or directly to utility companies, private corporations. Paul talked about, how if you can kind of secure, with the volatility of a lot of these state incentives, the California LCFS market especially has seen a lot of volatility recently. And so de-risking these projects by having, by being able to sell the gas without some of these extra credits, it is very valuable. And so, we work with kind of cradle to grave companies that have affiliated entities that are downstream and upstream in selling this renewable natural gas, which is, certainly de-risks, that whole process. And so finally, I kind of want to touch on in terms of the effects of some of these programs, and I hope maybe we can have time to discuss what's holding various states back from enacting similar types of legislation to have these low carbon programs in place. Recently, as I mentioned, Washington came on board and they have a similar program. New York was very close to passing a clean fuel standard, didn't pass with the most recent budget that their legislature passed, but Minnesota's been looking at one, New Mexico, and then in the materials for this program, we've included a white paper from the Great Plains Institute regarding a Midwestern clean fuels policy to reduce, again, the high carbon transportation fuels within these Midwestern states. So we'll see where some of those lead right now. Again, with the high cost of fuel in general, the question is, what's the effect going to have on the price of fuel? Fuel prices are already exceedingly high, and so there's been some research on that. Stillwater Associates has come out with some studies regarding what the effect is on the price of gasoline when gasoline is mixed with renewable natural gas to try and decarbonize it, and diesel fuel. So trying to, again, reduce that carbon intensity. Right now, I think, so Oregon, about 8 cents a gallon for a 3.5% carbon intensity reduction. In California, they found that the LCFS program added about 22 cents per gallon. This was in 2020 for a 7.5% CI reduction. So, you can see there is an effect, whether that is, justifies kind of an increase in the fuel cost is something for, everyone to consider. So with that, I'll turn the time over to our next panelist.
Thank you, Chris. Mark LaBelle.
Thank you, Mike, for the invitation. My name is Mark LaBelle. I'm with the Regulatory Systems Project. We are a national, international nonprofit that works on a range of energy and environmental issues. One of the main things we do is we advise public utility commissions on cutting-edge regulatory topics, and many of our leaders are former state commissioners or other kinds of officials. So this is a wide-ranging topic. And I'm going to zoom out a little bit to start. So there's at least 3 different intersecting sectors here. We have our electric power system, we have our local gas utilities, and the federally regulated transition pipelines that feed the gas utilities. And then we have our different end users. For the gas utilities, that tends to principally be the building sector, heating, cooking, industrial processes, sometimes electric generation. Transportation was brought up. That's not one of our major. Gas is not one of our. Natural gas is not one of our principal transportation fuels at the moment, but is relevant as well. So just thinking about how all these sectors integrate together is a big challenge. I'm going to focus on a couple things today. There's a lot of different policies that are relevant to decarbonizing the building sector. Energy efficiency programs, building codes, appliance standards. California has an economy-wide cap and trade program in addition to a wide range of other policies. One policy RAP has been working on recently, we're calling a clean heat standard. We've been doing this principally in New England. It was close to becoming law in Vermont, and we recently released the report for the Massachusetts government on this. There's a bunch of different ways that you could do it, but the shorthand is an RPS for heating services providers. To encourage and require them to provide clean heat instead of emitting heat. There's a bunch of different ways you could do that, and we can happily get into those details. The idea is to have a technically neutral, technologically neutral credit trading program that encourages and requires the transition. And then when you look down at the more detailed levels to how this is going to impact the local gas distribution companies, in the future, the gas utilities may be smaller than they are today or just quite different. There's going to be a competition among different zero carbon technologies that I think will be quite lively. And the cost and availability for zero carbon gas molecules, there's a lot of uncertainties. Green hydrogen right now is very expensive. Blue hydrogen with carbon capture and sequestration has some major uncertainties. And it's really going to have to compete with all these other kinds of heating systems. Clean district energy is another solution that's on the table. And look, these solutions are going to vary from place to place, from region to region. Maybe some regions will have a lot of hydrogen. Maybe some regions will fully electrify. So there's a lot of different solutions out there. We also put out a report a year ago that I think Mike mentioned, where we look at 3 different elements of regulating local gas utilities that should change as we go forward. One is improving planning. That's everything from integration with electric side planning to hearing from the disadvantaged communities and their concerns about this transition. One is improving energy efficiency programs. And then the last is reforming rate making. I think one overarching theme is that we're really in a time of uncertainty. And that before we commit and make major new investments that lock us into certain pathways, we should really look for least cost solutions that avoid really pushing us one way or another. So we don't want to have a lot of stranded costs in the future because we really don't know who the winners are going to be 10 or 20 years down the road. So with that, I'm happy to pass it along. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mark. Dan, you get to kind of sweep up this broad introduction.
No, thank you very much, Mike, and I appreciate you guys having me today. And this has been a great discussion so far. I just want to add a handful of thoughts and really get into the questions that you had laid out. Once again, my name is Dan Lepato. I'm with the American Gas Association. We represent over 200 natural gas utilities serving 73 million customers a day. And I throw these numbers out because we as an industry deliver a lot of energy 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And as part of our industry and more specifically, as part of our relationship, both with utility commissions, administrations, and elected officials, is looking at ways how to, as we talk about today, decarbonize our system. How do we deliver energy more efficiency through our system? Because we're really, and Mark does a great point, is that we're really at a very interesting time from an energy policy perspective. Right now we have two great energy delivery systems touching every house or business in this country. And as a natural gas industry, as the natural gas utilities look forward to delivering energy, I think this is a real opportunity for us to continue to have multiple systems touching individual homes and delivering clean energy, both through a wire and ultimately through a pipe. And I highlight all this because these questions are at the forefront of everything we do, at the forefront of what our members are talking every day with elected officials, with commissions, with staff. And to highlight that, earlier this year, Mike, we dropped a great study. We called our low carbon study, looking at this exact conversation and ideas. And from an industry perspective, I think we kind of really circle around four major areas that we look to decarbonize, to lower our carbon footprint. And it first always starts with our infrastructure. The continued investment and reinvestment into our infrastructure. Not only is that for the environment, but it really starts with the safety, and that's key for our industry. The second one is the probably from a decarbonization standpoint, the most important one, and it doesn't matter what energy resource you talk about, it's energy efficiency. We're investing millions of dollars every day into energy efficiency programs, into energy efficiency research. We're constantly looking at the way our end users, our customers, our homeowners, the businesses use natural gas. How can we make it more efficient? How can we use less energy to deliver the same amount of desired product, income, heat, hot water, whatever it may be. The third big area, what we're talking a lot about today, is developing these low carbon, no carbon fuels. It starts as something as simple as looking at something like certified gas, natural gas being produced by certified sources, to the development and continued development of resources like renewable natural gas. In that low carbon study, we've done the math, if I could say it that way, and we know today, just today, from there's enough renewable natural gas to offset the residential and a good portion of the commercial natural gas needs. And that's today, and that's economically feasible. That's not technically feasible. That's what can be done from an economic standpoint that Paul and Chris had referenced in their opening remarks. And hydrogen's right around the corner. Hydrogen is really something that we're really excited about. We're really interested in not just developing the technology, but partnering with states, partnering with legislative groups, partnering with others to one, develop hydrogen, two, develop hydrogen markets, and three, deliver that energy to those markets. And that commitment around hydrogen is really being on display through DOE's hydrogen hub, or through the hydrogen hub programs. Yeah, we have seen multiple states come out talking about the work that they're doing to achieve hydrogen hubs or to achieve some of that funding for hydrogen hubs. And the third big area is looking at programs to help incentivize for those hard to decarbonize sectors. I think it's something that we need to take a look at is our offset programs, where we reinvest into environmental programs in the communities. Maybe the last big hurdle that we need to get to. But with that, Mike, I'll turn it back over to you. I know you had laid out some great conversations and questions, and I look forward to the dialogue today. Thanks.
So I'll ask all of our speakers to turn their cameras on so we can maybe get this a little more interactive. We've had in your introductions, you made a lot of reference, I think, to the technologies already with the direct carbon capture, the Kemper the Kemper project attempt. Chris, you gave a good explanation, I think, of the nature of some of the renewable natural gas technology and the process and kind of what's involved with that. And Chris Garbaz, you also mentioned hydrogen as one of those things that's out there on the edge. It's presumably going to be part of this conversation going forward. But are those the primary technologies that are kind of in play or kind of on the horizon at this point? Are there other things that are going to be affecting this challenge? And Chris Peterson, Chris Garbaz, I don't know if one of you might kick that off. Chris, you've got yourself muted still. There you go, Chris.
I'll defer to Chris Peterson on this. Thank you.
Okay.
Now, as far as technologies, I mentioned, a few of the technologies in play right now. Well, the primary technology that I work with are the anaerobic digestion equipment. And there are two kind of pieces of this technology that are in use. The first is the digester that really creates what's called biogas, which is kind of primarily methane, but it has some of these other trace gases. And then there's this, additional piece of equipment, the scrubbing or conditioning equipment that makes it into pipeline quality gas. And so, as far as that technology, I think there's still, as this type of, technology is in more use, as more developers come into play to develop these projects, I can see the costs of this equipment being reduced. Right now, I see numbers all the time, but kind of an average number I've seen is close to 20 million for capital expenditures on this equipment. And so if we see more equipment manufacturers coming out, new technologies to reduce this. I know there's some technologies in Europe. I've had some clients that are trying to bring over some anaerobic digestion technologies from Europe here into the United States, which could reduce some of those capital expenditures. But, again, with more widespread adoption, I think we see a lot of those expenses coming down.
If I could jump in on that real quick, and Chris, I really do appreciate what you threw out there. I thought that was very helpful. What we talked about in the dairy industry probably 15 years ago in Idaho, and I hate to be one of those people to say back in my home state, but the truth be told, as we were seeing a larger dairy industry come together and we started to look what could happen to help reduce some of the costs, one of the things they started to look at is, would there be a way to build a central processing facility so that the methane from multiple dairies could be sent via gathering lines to one central larger facility to get some more economies of scale? And I'm wondering to what extent maybe you think that may be an option going forward.
Oh, absolutely. In fact, the way that these projects, from a profitability standpoint, again, the larger the source of manure that you can feed into it, the reduction in the costs for that developer. And so having, oftentimes we'll set up these projects where there's one hub farm and then there are surrounding satellite farms that kind of feed feedstock into that, main, hub farm. And so that certainly reduces the costs and allows, a faster return on investment for the developer and justifying the project.
So we had one question that came in that is tangential a little bit, but I think I want to get a clarification. I think it relates to a little to this a little bit, Paul, that you raised. Is Paul, you made reference to that, the gas has to be used in the transportation market, especially to get some of these credits. So by transportation market, do you literally mean for particular fleets or vehicles, or by transportation market, do you mean more the wholesale market going through the pipeline?
Well, there are others who can give you more of the granular detail of how the process works, but the end users for this are compressed natural gas vehicles, and we see a lot of cities and counties that have bus fleets that are compressed natural gas. Some have even gone to the point of even converting some of their fleet vehicles for in-town use that are not for mass transportation, like cars, vans, into compressed natural gas as well. So it is a market that already exists in that field.
Okay, very good. Mark?
Well, I was just going to flag that the Federal Renewable Fuel Standard, which is the program that creates the market for the RINs, I believe, is primarily a transportation, like vroom vroom cars, buses program, not sort of a heating sector program.
Okay. Fantastic. Thank you for clarifying that. One of the things, and I mentioned this to you in our prep calls, that I've heard that for some of these RNG projects, we don't get the credit unless it goes into the pipeline. And so there are some, large, livestock facilities that have RNG projects where they're getting the gas into the pipeline, then they're taking gas out of the pipeline because it's the only way they can get the credit, instead of just using the gas on an internal loop, which would avoid transportation and possible leakage costs and getting it from the farm to the pipe and from the pipe back to the farm. So that's where there were some, I wasn't sure exactly where we were on some of those margins. So what are some of the, the challenges? We talked a little bit about, Chris Garbaz, you talked about the problem of trying to scale up from kind of development pilot technology on the direct carbon capture technology to the size of something like Kemper. And maybe we need to take smaller steps as we try and grow the technologies that way. Chris, you talked about some of the innovating technologies coming in and the possible for new development, the ability to bring technology from overseas that might make this process more efficient. What are some of the barriers to getting this adopted? We know that it's a relatively small part of the market still. Is it the technology isn't there yet? Is it the economics aren't there yet? As we kind of talked that Paul mentioned earlier on with the renewable gas. Is it there are policies that are creating barriers to adoption and implementation of these technologies? Kind of what are some of the major roadblocks and where are they coming from? Mark, do you want to start with that one?
So I think at RAP we there's a lot of technology policies out there. I think, and there's going to be a lot of R&D and efforts to bring down the cost of all of them. I think we are interested in having a competition among all of these different technologies, and that's not just within the gas industry. That's across, heating services can be provided by a wide range of different technologies. And there's a fascinating discussion in the Northeast about clean district energy, and New York actually just passed a statute allowing gas utilities and electric utilities to own clean district energy. So I think there's just the future is big, and I always use a quote from Yogi Berra. Predictions are hard, especially about the future. So I don't know what gas utilities are going to look like in 20 years. I have colleagues from Vermont who noted there used to be municipal gas utilities, manufactured gas utilities in Vermont, and they're gone now. And the towns and cities in Vermont that had manufactured gas utilities use other heating services now. I'm not going to suggest that the gas utilities are going away. Maybe a few of them won't survive, but there's so many different possibilities out there. We don't know where the hydrogen is going to be produced. We don't know where the best sources of renewable biomethane are going to be. Is it going to be the same pipeline pathways as now? Maybe not. There's so many different questions that we're going to have to figure out.
Dan, do you have some thoughts on that?
No, I mean, yeah, it's what it is. I always have thoughts, right? No, but I think Mark did a great job highlighting the fact that, my crystal ball is as cloudy as everybody else's, right? So we don't know what direction we're going in, but we're continuously investing and looking forward at these technologies. And I just, for the group, we talk about decarbonizing the natural gas utility. The fuels is just part of this equation. And I don't mean to harp on it, but the other parts of the equation is, once again, is really investing in technologies, looking at how do we make a better burner tip? How do we use the energy wiser? I think that's where we have to start this conversation. The other big piece of this conversation is as Mark mentioned here, it's the infrastructure. I think maintaining and investing in infrastructure that can deliver energy in the years to come. That energy is, natural gas, it's renewable natural gas, biogas, it's hydrogen, it's all these different potential resources out there. And to Mark's point is, as these resources mature and develop, we'll have a better understanding of how the industry will shape out and how the industry will deliver energy, and quite frankly, how the industry will intermix with the other resources out there, either electric or propane or whatever it may be. Ultimately, it comes down to the interplay between all these resources for delivering, once again, that the concept we have is delivering energy reliably and safely. And without that, this whole conversation goes away, because no one wants to be in a position where they don't have the energy they need when they need it. So I think it's really an exciting time. Just to put a finer point on it, and then I know I'll let others get in here, is to the technology and investment. We talk a lot about it. From a natural gas industry, from just our side, the distribution side of the industry, we're investing $95 million a day in this technologies, either investing in technologies, upgrading our system, looking at developing things like RNG. We have several pilot projects already with hydrogen, and hydrogen's not new. I love the fact with the manufactured gas, right, Mark? We can take a flip and go all the way out to Hawaii. Hawaii Gas still uses manufactured energy, and they've been using this energy now for 30 plus years, and it has hydrogen in it. So we have done this already. This isn't new. It comes down to what we talked about earlier, is scalability. How do we bring this to the masses, and how can we do it in a safe, affordable, and responsible way? And I think that's the key that from an AGA perspective is partnering once again with the commissions on looking at the best and wisest ways to deploy these technologies that are good, that achieve the decarbonization goals, but at the same time keeps the consumer in the forefront of our efforts. Thanks.
So let me interject quickly for our attendees today. I want to remind you that if you have questions, we do want to take those questions. So if you open the Q&A box and type in any questions there, and while you're getting a couple of those questions in the time we have left, Dan, you kind of touched on this, and I wanted to get to that last part of the three questions, but I want to start with Paul. What, from the regulatory side, especially at the state commission level, what do regulators need to be thinking about, or what are regulators thinking about? You weren't in that job not that long ago, around this issue, and what are some of the ideas that need to be considered at that level? And then, Mark, I know you've done work on this. Maybe you can chime in, and whoever else might have something to say.
Well, I think it's a great question to pose, and one I think is to understand the role of regulators, state commissioners as a case in point. It is very different from state to state. In states where they are elected or constitutional officers, they are policymakers. But in the majority of the states where they're appointed, regulators are not the policymakers. They implement the policy. So it's very different roles as you look at that. So again, the reason I keep bringing up the word policy is that's really where things have to happen, I think, to see some of this innovation start to move forward a little bit. Regulators that are not policymakers, and I think regulators as a whole, this is a safe statement to say, are very, very risk averse. And as a result, so too are the utilities that they regulate. And with that said, until there are certainties in terms of cost recovery, the investment community is not as likely to help a utility move forward. So unless there are policies and other incentives in place, and I'm not sitting back saying you have to be an advocate for incentives and mandates, but those things do help the investment community find a little more comfort, and regulators as well, as they start to move forward and see utilities they regulate be engaged in this arena. And I think what happens when you see some of those first adopters, not all these projects are successful, but some of them are, and we learn from each one of them as they move forward. But as this innovation begins to prove itself out, as Dan has described, a lot of this technology isn't new. It's just new now in terms of the fact that we're paying more attention to it and recognizing the benefit it can have in the decarbonization world, and that we need to perhaps accelerate or expand the path forward on that. But as we see more of this innovation start to pan out and work, and we learn from some of the failures and successes, I think we're going to see that risk piece continue to diminish. We're going to see the technology expand, and we're going to see the investment community more eager and willing to help put money into that, which is going to make it easier, I think, for regulators to get on board with some of these projects, especially in states where they don't currently have mandates.
Thanks, Paul. Couple things to add on that, I guess. So in Colorado, they have passed a law that requires clean heat plans for the gas utilities. So they're looking at a number of implementation details on that in the next couple of years, and I think Xcel Energy is due to file a clean heat plan in 2024 or so, maybe even next year at this point. And then there are a few commissions where the commissioners have a little more room to run than others. So California, New York, a couple others are taking a good look at some gas utility regulatory issues. How do you improve the planning process? New York led the way on the electric side with non-wires alternatives to see if there's energy efficiency or other local resources that can avoid expensive or perhaps impossible in certain cases distribution upgrades. And they're applying some of the same approaches to gas utility investments. Sometimes this is in response to siting challenges. There are communities in New York that don't want to have new compressor stations and have fought on the siting and permitting side for other solutions. So I think there's so much variation from state to state. We're seeing some changes to line extension policies. A lot of the questions are like, these are economic questions about like what are the timelines that we're looking at here, and whether or not they're policy. I think they're a detailed part of rate making, and they're in some sense unavoidable. They're often buried in the weeds of a rate case or something, but the commissioners do deal with them in one way or another. So I think we're seeing it bubble up. Obviously, we have the leading states in this area, just like any other area, but I think we're seeing it bubble up in other ways too.
We do have a couple of questions that have come in, so I want to throw those out to the group. The first one, I think this is aimed, Dan, at you, or at least part of it is. I thought I heard one of the panelists say something about investing $95 million a day in technology and infrastructure. Is this investment recovered from ratepayers? Is it prudent when some of the conversations about decarbonizing the grid are around electrification? I'm hearing more about potential guidance that expanding the natural gas system does not align with long-term equitable decarbon goals.
So it is in some cases recoverable, and other cases it's that number includes money that we would give to like organizations like GTI Energy looking at research and burner tips. But I think the question itself really is it gets to the fundamentals of what we're looking at. And I think the issue and question around electrification, and one of the oftentimes we discuss it in the fact that, electrification may be one pathway, but it's not the only pathway to decarbonizing our energy system. So from our perspective, we think investment in natural gas infrastructure is a prudent investment because if you're truly talking about a decarbonized energy source, the technologies we talked about today are right there. The technologies like RNG or hydrogen from renewable sources is a decarbonized energy source that runs through pipe. And it should be part of that conversation. What we are seeing is in some discussions, in some places, we're seeing a lot of groups who may be advocating for a singular path forward. And that path is not really based on any environmental goal per se, but it's really based on more of I'll call it anti-fossil fuel goal. And what we're trying to do is change and engage in conversation saying, look, as jurisdictions, localities are looking at achieving their carbon emission reduction goals, it may be 50, 75, 100%, whatever it may be. Not only do we think the gas utilities and natural gas utilities should be at the table, but we could be part of the solution. And quite frankly, we're going to have to be part of that solution simply based on what I opened up with my statements early on is, yeah, the natural gas infrastructure today delivers a tremendous amount of energy, especially as you go farther north into the winter months. The natural gas utilities deliver 4 times as much energy as the electric utility in the South does in the summer. So to put that in context, the peak winter day is 4 times more energy intensive than the peak summer day on the electric side. And that's the conversations we're trying to ask. And when we engage regulators, policymakers, whoever it may be, we come in and say, here's the opportunities we can offer to help achieve your decarbonization goals and achieve it in a way that adds redundancy, that adds resiliency. And quite frankly, I think as we move on through these conversations, I think the key for us is not looking at this as a singular pathway. It's not an electric pathway. It's not a propane pathway. It's not a natural gas pathway. It's ultimately going to be one energy policy discussion about how all these energy forms interplay with each other. And to that point, I go back and I think that $95 million that we invest every day is a prudent investment in a system if we're looking at really truly earnestly looking at emissions and greenhouse gas emission reductions.
So we have one other question, but does anyone have a quick follow-up or addition to what Dan just said? Yeah, I'm going to target this next question at you, Chris Peterson. What about the rapid warming effects of methane leakage related to RNG? Even with major investments, methane leakage remains a concern in terms of climate impacts. Where does this fit in with RNG and the decarbonization solution?
So, my first question would be whether that's in relation to the process of creating the RNG or in the process of, once that RNG is input into the pipeline and, eventually used in, whether it's the state of California or Oregon, because as it, as that methane, as that natural gas is used in transportation vehicles, these are combustible vehicles that are using this, and there is going to be some, some kind of discharge. Now that's why they refer to RNG powered vehicles as near zero carbon vehicles. I guess there is a small kind of trace amount that could still leak into the environment. But, again, at this point, in terms of, from say a cattle farmer's perspective, allowing that natural gas or that methane gas just to seep into the environment in whole and completely, as opposed to just a small trace amount that might result from burning that in a combustible natural gas powered vehicle, is again enough in the regulatory agency's eyes to justify allowing that as a means of reducing the carbon intensity of the transportation fuels.
So I think so. The question, I think they were thinking specifically more about the pipeline and the transportation of the methane from source to consumer.
Mike, if I could I'm sorry, Chris.
Go ahead, Dan.
Yeah, no, I just kind of put in context. I think when the RNG is developed and put into particularly the local natural gas infrastructure, that local infrastructure is incredibly tight. You know, our loss and unaccountable rate, that's essentially our leak rate, if you will, is less than 1% as an industry wide. I mean, it's nothing. So I think a lot of the concerns and fears about putting renewable energy, hydrogen, whatever it may be, into the local distribution system is somewhat, it's more of a fear not based on science, you know, and these leak rates and loss of unattainable is something that we constantly are working on and reporting back to the commissions that regulate us. And I just want to highlight that for the audience is that when RNG, particularly RNG that's developed and used within the local infrastructure itself, there's little to no leakage or emissions from that use or from the development and ultimately the distribution of that renewable energy source.
Okay, thank you, Dan. We are at 101, so we're just a tad over time. And as we talked in our planning meeting, and as our advisory board committee talked about, this topic could be easily a full day seminar. So we're really just kind of hitting the tip of the iceberg on some of these issues. I want to thank each of you for taking your time today and sharing with us. This has been very enlightening for me, and I hope helpful for those who tuned in. For those who weren't able to be here, we will be hanging this, we will be posting the video of this or recording of this webinar on our YouTube page in the coming week. So you can go back and fact check Dan and go back and watch the webinar and catch additional notes. And I had put a link in the chat for a document that has a link to some of the reports that our speakers have talked about today. But I want to thank you each for your time and for sharing with us today and for being part of our program. This has been very helpful. So I would really like to give you like 1 minute each to just kind of any concluding thought. So if you can stick with us for that, let me just run through that real quick if someone would like to start.
I'll chime in first, and it'd be very short. I think first movers in this space are extremely important. And I think to the extent that we see any kind of DOE money or other money available to help move these things along, I think it only helps us overall see some of these innovative technologies reach their ultimate expectations.
Mike, I just take the opportunity and thank you guys for having me. This is a great discussion. I learned a lot from the other panelists. Like Paul, I think early adopters are really important. I think the other key here from our perspective is this technology is here. We're starting to see it deployed and we're working very closely with commissions, not just to plan, invest in these technologies, but ultimately to, as someone had mentioned, incorporate these resources into our long-term planning dockets, looking at our gas purchasing docket, and really incorporating them into our business models moving forward. So with that, thank you.
Again, you know, there are still a lot of risks out there for developers of renewable natural gas projects. I am you know, always excited to see new states adapt low carbon fuel standards that further de-risk these projects for everybody else. And, you know, I foresee that trend continuing, that as more states adapt these types of programs and mandates, you know, the risks are going to decrease. You know, the profitability of these projects and return on investment will be better as well.
Happy to go. Yeah, I think from our perspective, we're excited about a wide range of decarbonization technologies and having fair, technology neutral, sector-wide policies that allow for you know, if the solutions are there and they're available to show up and at an affordable price, we're excited to see what we can get done. So I think that the broader framework that encourages all these technologies to compete with each other is important.
Chris Garbaz, any parting word?
Oh, I just wanted to say that there's a little bit of economics here that we may, I think it was touched upon, but take account of the rising interest rates and take account of inflation and take account of risk. I know all that's maybe been discussed, but those are very important issues. And to the extent that the federal government is involved, or for that matter, states, there's going to be a problem, I think, in terms of funding here. If the interest rates rise significantly, federal government is going to be in terrible trouble in terms of being able to carry forth with funding of anything, for that matter. And so that's a big issue, I think. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That's a good addition. As an economist, I endorse that statement. So again, thank you all for your time today. To our attendees, thank you for joining us today. Be on the lookout for future hot topic hotlines from FRI, and check our website, fri.missouri.edu. Follow us on Twitter at FRI_news, or look for our LinkedIn page for updates on what's going on. Thank you all very much and have a great afternoon.
Thanks.